Hello, what is going on, guys? Hockey Guy 1 here. Welcome to my review of Shrek the Third. Shrek the Third is directed by Chris Miller and stars Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, Cameron Diaz, Antonio Banderas, Justin Timberlake, Eric Idle, and Rupert Everett. The story is about Shrek, who is next in line for the throne after King Harold dies, but he does not feel like he is suited for the king, so King Harold ends up telling him that he has to find Arthur because he's the only other one who can become king after that because he is Fiona's cousin. So Shrek goes on a quest to find Arthur and bring him back to take his place as king of Far, Far Away. But at the same time, Prince Charming wants to take that throne because he is really mad about the last movie and as well, and just he wants revenge and just wants to be on top. So he basically has to get bad time to stop him from completely taking over Far, Far Away, and before he catches him and kills him. The story, while not perfect, I still kind of like. The whole thing with Shrek trying to find a new heir and bring back Arthur makes sense because he's just doesn't really feel like he's suited for it, and it makes sense why he doesn't feel suited. I mean, he is an ogre, and not only that, he does have the past that he does. I mean, not only does he feel like he's not suited for it, he does also want to find a way to come back to his swamp eventually because he is having a baby as well, and that I feel it also has something to do with it, and I think that does sort of make sense. And just the whole thing with him and Arthur, or like how he's just kind of like acting like a father to Arthur, kind of makes sense. I mean, he is a father, so he does have like one with Arthur because, well, he does really need him to get back too far, far away because he needs someone to take the throne because, well, he really knows that Charlie is going after the throne, so he especially does need to get back there for that. And I do think just that part of the story mostly works, just the whole thing with that. I mean, it's just the whole main idea of the story, just trying to find a new heir to take his place because he doesn't feel like he should be the king. The whole structure behind the story was, again, not perfect, but I still felt like it was relatively done well. The first act starts out, it shows Prince Charming kind of reenacting what he would want his life to end up being like, at least what he wanted to. And then he ended up being made fun of for it by all the fairy tale creatures, and it makes sense. I mean, basically the secondary villain of the last movie, so it makes sense to start the movie with him getting mocked by our hero. I mean, especially when he just runs outside and angry and upset about it, and just looks at a photo of his mother and says that he wants to end when he started basically trying to overthrow the whole kingdom with Shrek, and knows, because he also knows that the king is also not in the best condition, so he definitely will try and get revenge on Shrek and trying to overthrow the kingdom. Like, that already starts it off right away, showing Prince Charming just wants to get back the kingdom. I feel like he lost and wants his happily ever after. Shows him exactly what he's intending to do in the movie, and it just shows that he's just not gonna put up with what he's doing in there, and just really is mad at Shrek, so he wants to overthrow the kingdom, get his revenge, and get his happily ever after at the top of the kingdom. Then they kind of cut to Shrek, kind of showing him he's definitely not exactly the most excited about royalty and stuff like that, because it already shows that, like, the beginning, why he wouldn't want to be suited for a king. I mean, you can already see, because, like, the way he accidentally, like, killed his man with the sword, at least that's what it shows, and just how he ends up throwing, like, the whole bottle at the ship, like, the whole thing. That's supposed to be showing, like, the reason why I think that makes sense to kind of, like, start off the movie that way is because, like, it's already kind of, like, showing, it's giving you an idea why he would not want to be at the top, why he doesn't feel he's suited for king. It's a good way to really express that, because he's not really suited to be king because he's doing all this stuff that looks like it'd be wrecking the kingdom, and just, like, throwing a bottle at his ship, lowering a sword and killing a guy. Yeah, I don't think any of that was done for him, but I think that 100% done to show why he would not want to be king. It definitely does give me that idea. This guy is not suited to be king because, well, he accidentally killed a guy with a sword, and he threw a bottle at his ship, setting it on fire. I mean, it totally makes sense. And then especially once he gets to, like, whole coronation thing ends up having like fire and turning into a mess, and then he just runs and is like they got to believing and he's really mad about this because he definitely doesn't feel suited for royalty and just doesn't really like the whole thing. And then he gets the hearing of King Harold on his deathbed, really close to dying, so he ends up going on, and I think that most of this scene is powerful. I mean, it makes sense. You know what I mean? They're giving a whole death speech, basically telling him that he has to be king, and like Shrek is telling him he does not feel suited for king. I mean, he's saying it's because of the number king, but they already gave an idea before. I mean, you can see it before in the scene. I mean, he's already like causing disaster, and so he doesn't feel suited to be at the top. I mean, it's because like he's already kind of caused disaster as just simply a prince, but at the top he would not feel right. So he's trying to tell Harold that is his abilities, and then he gotta tell him only other person you can get is Arthur, and already sets up the plot pretty well, and he tells you exactly what the whole plot is gonna end up being because Shrek doesn't feel suited to be king, and it only makes sense there, and completely works to like kick off the second act in a way. And like after the funeral scene, they have Prince Charming, he's looking over it, getting his plan together, and then he goes to the Poison Apple, his whole plan together, basically asks for them to team up with him because he's like having a whole speech. Like, all of them have something in common. They all lost a happily ever after, which I think makes sense. I mean, that's a good way to kind of like get them all together. I mean, it makes you kind of feel convinced why they would team up with Prince Charming because they all lost something in a way. It does a good job kind of kicking off acts a bit with Prince Charming's part of it with his plan to take over the kingdom. Then they do aboard a ship going to Arthur because obviously he needs to save him if needs. They have an heir that isn't him, and he has like all these kind of like airs about being a father, which I think that they are kind of discussing, if I'm being honest, but I think that's kind of the point. I mean, it's supposed to show that Shrek is kind of afraid of being a father, and it's just showing exactly what he's being afraid of because he knows that they do stuff like that, so that's exactly what he's afraid of. And then the conversation with his puss and donkey, and before they eventually do end up arriving, and they do show the ice balloon, do pick up Arthur. They do get him back on the ship, and then Arthur just let me out because he doesn't really know if he really wants to do this at all because he's kind of been a loser his whole life. And then when they crash, they do end up meeting up with Merlin. They do show one specific scene that work. I mean, it shows something where Shrek and Arthur can relate to each other with the scene where he's talking about how his father was, and it's actually a pretty touching moment that ends up working out pretty well into the story, as it really just shows more of the father thing, and it's kind of like connecting it more, seeing Arthur and Shrek grow more together. Then they eventually do end up getting back to far, far away after Merlin brings them back there with magic, and then they do get back there, and there's a thing where Donkey and Puss are switch bodies, and obviously they like realize Prince Charming has already taken over because, well, she invaded there, plus he attacked them at Merlin's place. So once they get there, Prince Charming is already there and ruling, and so he calls in guards to get Shrek all tied up. And then there's the whole climax where it's basically inside this whole theater play where Prince Charming is trying to kill Shrek in it as the end of it, so we can have it happily ever after. It's just a pretty different kind of climax, to say the least. I mean, I think this whole thing makes sense most of the scenes, at least, and I do kind of find it entertaining a bit as into it. I mean, they do show the things like Shrek, he's back at Charming. It just makes it more entertaining to me, and obviously Charming doing a poor performance, but Shrek making fun of him, honestly, what made it more entertaining. If it wasn't there, that climax would be easily a lot more dreadful than it was. And the whole thing, there's the rest of them stop it from killing Shrek, and then they come in, and then Arthur comes back, has a whole speech about it, and it does end up making them switch sides, and basically there's a whole thing with Prince Charming is close to killing Shrek. There's a fake out death, and then Shrek ends up being goes to fall under the hassle that he British theater, and then Arthur is crowned king, which I think is a good way to kind of to show that he's finally accepting that he's the next heir and solving the whole plot of the movie right there, as Charming's defeated, and now he can take his place as the heir, and then show them they're back in the swamp and raising the ogre babies. And I think that's a good way to end the movie, as it shows is one of the main aspects of the movie is the whole thing of how Shrek was going to be a father. It ends exactly with that. I think it makes sense, as it already shows he's now happy with it and is learning more to accept it despite his fear of it. The pacing is mostly good. Most of the time they do a good job kind of keeping consistent, getting it out to its runtime, and I think most of the time it does end up doing a pretty good job at that, and most scenes do stay pretty entertaining. Most of the time does end up getting out to its runtime for the most part, but there are a few parts that I'll get into later. Also, the humor in this movie as well, it's kind of the same way. I mean, it's not the best in the moment. There are a few jokes that do hit, but in the few that don't. Shrek was a good character. This movie, he kind of takes the next step with the whole progression, with the whole thing of him becoming a father. Most of the time, he does act like a father to Arthur, and I think they do that to kind of progress how he's going to become a father. That's a pretty good job to kind of express his character, and especially since he's afraid of being a father, do a pretty good job showing that. I mean, having Arthur really way younger than him kind of got him into the more father routine, and I think that's more what his progression was doing to the end, when he was kind of okay with being a father. And then they have the whole thing at the beginning where he's just not confident becoming king. Like, he just decided he's not suited, so he did not want to be king, and was specifically told King Harold that, and that's what he got the whole plot along with why he wanted to get to Harold to begin with. And it was a pretty good job with them. I mean, and it shows exactly why he doesn't want to be king, because why he doesn't feel suited, because well, he causes a wreck. It really shows that he's not suited for king. Donkey and Puss were pretty good characters. They did tag along with Shrek throughout the movie. A lot of the times they do sort of help him. I mean, especially with Puss, like the way he tries to help him with the whole thing with him being a father, and just like the kind of joke that he had around there, and it's just the whole thing there was a good job kind of like showing him, like helping Shrek up away. With Donkey characters, they kind of like give him these weird half dragon, half donkey babies, and kind of like gives you more of an idea of relationship with Dragon as well, since Dragon was left out of the last movie. And then I was kind of mixed on Arthur's character. There are a few elements that I like about it, like the whole thing where he's just accepting himself to become king after all that. It totally makes sense. I think it makes sense because, well, you can see him like rolling with Shrek a bit in the movie, just when he's with Merlin. It shows how he's kind of like similar to Shrek in a way, and end up accepting his spot as a king after kind of being childish about it at first. I think that was a good progression with it. It's just, I'll get into more later what I kind of had my problems with the character. I kind of feel the same thing about Fiona in this movie. I kind of feel mixed about her. I mean, it shows that she kind of had about the whole pregnancy, how she's going to become parent. It kind of like breaks her and Shrek's relationship to the next step, just to have kids. I did like how they did show more about how she got martial arts abilities from it. That goes back to the first movie with Queen Jillian. You know, showing that basically she got out of the prison like that. I liked that a bit, but like I said, I'm kind of mixed on her character, and there are a few things that I feel like they could have done a bit better with, but I'll get into that later. Prince Charming is not perfect, but I think he's mostly good in this movie. You can see it. He wants revenge with Shrek because of the last movie. I mean, he wants his happily ever after, and I think it only makes sense because his mother is already gone, so that plan didn't work, and now he needs to try something else to get it back, like coming back, and the king obviously would be mad at Shrek because, well, Shrek is pretty much responsible for that not working. Really kind of showed how strong he is. I mean, he just easily kind of like retold and not exactly the smartest plan, but his plan with killing Shrek as a theater play. It's rather a silly plan to say the least, but if I'm being honest, I don't really mind it. I mean, I think it makes sense for his character, because like he's not exactly supposed to be the smartest character. I mean, he was the secondary villain in the last movie. The entire point of that, he kind of wanted to embarrass Shrek and front of everyone. Why he wanted to kill him in front of everyone just so everyone in the kingdom could see it. The voice acting is really good. Mike Myers and Eddie Murphy, Antonio Banderas, and Cameron Diaz, I mean, they all return, obviously. They all just do good as they did in the previous series. I mean, they're all really confident in their respective roles, and ones like Justin Timberlake and Eric Idle did a pretty good job. They felt confident in their roles. I mean, they looked like, especially Eric Idle did sound like he was having fun, despite his character not exactly being the best. And the whole Rupert Everett who returned in Prince Charming, he did feel pretty entertaining for the most part. Did a pretty good job with his role, and definitely still felt like the character. The animation is still really good. I mean, there's really much to add about this statement than what I said about it in the previous two movies. And it's pretty much the same style that they used in the last movie. So it still looks just as good as it did, and pretty good job with the new characters, still look fine. And then Far Far Away did change its design a bit, I did notice, but it still looks fine enough. It also, the high school looks like high school really, and really, there isn't really much else to add about it. I mean, the animation is great, just like it is in the previous two films. They use the exact same style. The soundtrack is mostly great. Often the first song in the movie that they use is Royal Pain, which really works for me. It's kind of, in a way, a follow-up to a previous Eels song that they used in the last movie, I Need Some Sleep, because it starts like saying, I got some sleep, and I needed it, and I think that's pretty clever. It calls back to the last movie a bit. Not only that, the whole thing it's singing about is the whole royal pain in the neck. That's literally what went on with Shrek. I mean, you can see like he's having a lot of royal pain being in royalty. It really just works as that kind of song for that kind of moment. And later on in the movie, they use the song Nine Crimes when Arthur's really going away. It kind of works for this moment because they're kind of away from each other. And then there's Barracuda, which, I mean, there's only really one thing about it that really doesn't work for me, and I can get into that later, but I think that mostly works for the whole thing, like where they breaking in this Stop Charming kind of thing. I mean, I think that song mostly works for it. I mean, it's a pretty fun song and it's used for kind of fun kind of scene. With all that said, this movie definitely does have its problems. The subplot with whole princesses and Fiona, I feel like could have been a lot better than what it was. They already kind of like show them together because of how Fiona is pregnant and having a baby soon. But if I'm being honest, it seemed like that could have been a lot better. I mean, it could have been a lot more engaging and entertaining, but they decided just to have a talk about other stuff in it, and it's just really just necessary, if I'm being honest, wasn't exactly what they talk about. I mean, it really makes the scene drag on a bit, and then once they get out of it, they reveal that for some reason Rapunzel's with Prince Charming, which I feel like is just there because they needed a reason to get into some, which I feel like they could have come up with a better thing than that. It doesn't really make sense because why would you do that? They don't really say anything. What's Rapunzel's motivation for randomly turning on the rest of the princesses and seeing where Prince Charming had to find out where Shrek was? I mean, that one could have been executed a lot better because it just kind of happened with Pinocchio kind of being annoying, and then they just blurted it out because Pinocchio was annoying. I feel like that could have been a lot better than what it was. I mean, they could have done a much easier thing than that, than just having it be annoying and drag on and more about this. You know, all these problems and then go into like story structure and pacing. And then the third act break, it really could have been done a lot better. I mean, I feel like it was kind of unnecessary, if I'm being honest, because like Shrek and Arthur were definitely building a relationship until that point where he just kind of like flips out because apparently he lied to him by saying that he was next in line for the throne, when that wasn't exactly a lie because he technically could be on next line of the throne because Shrek didn't want to be king, and it's not like they're just there because, well, they kind of needed something to happen so they can like break up for the climax, and that's about it. He easily gets talked back into it by Puss and Donkey, tell him why he did it. Easily was solved just by a simple conversation like most breakup cliches. It made less sense really for this movie. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the princesses are kind of wasted potential. He could have done a lot more with scenes with the princesses and Fiona. They don't really do enough or really much at all with them, and the really thing they do with one of them is Rapunzel ends up changing sides with Prince Charming because of some deal that was made off screen, and that's about it. I said earlier, like with Fiona or something, I definitely feel like they could have expressed a bit more with her in scenes like that, and It's kind of where I kind of was talking about earlier when I said there were some things I didn't really like about her character. And I really just found Merlin really annoying. I mean, I didn't really like his character at all. Just really annoying. A lot of the things, he's kind of obnoxious. I wish they did more with his character. I mean, he's really just there. It isn't really much to him. I just kind of find him to be annoying, and that's about him. Then, like I said earlier, there were a few things with Arthur that I didn't really like, and I didn't really like how childish he was at times. That breakup thing I felt like was a bit childish of him. But, like, I do like his progression, like I said earlier, but I do think that a lot of things with his character could have been handled a lot better, like early on with how he's like kind of childish, like when he found out he was going to become king, just caused a whole wreck about that. I feel like could have done a bit better with his character with that. Then the only song I really didn't feel like was necessary was Live and Let Die. I mean, it's basically just a Bond theme song that is not really sad at all, and they use it during a funeral scene, which I'm almost laughing at, because like, why would you use it there? Because it's supposed to be a sad scene, and then you're using such a song that isn't sad at all. I mean, it's supposed to make you feel more excitement. I know why they use it, because it says die in it, but like, it's just not a sad song, so like, why would you use it in a funeral scene? It just doesn't really make sense for that. And as I mentioned earlier, the Barracuda thing, the only thing I really like about that is like how it started with like the immigrant song, and then kind of right into it. I mean, it didn't really make sense because all they did was the scream that was like slightly off sync, and then they go into the Barracuda song. Overall, Shrek the Third may not be the first two movies, and it definitely does have its issues, but it's far from the worst movie, and is still a relatively good movie overall that I enjoyed. So I'm gonna give Shrek the Third a 7 out of 10. That was my review of Shrek the Third. What are your thoughts on Shrek the Third? Tell me in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.